Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, some energy, come on. Let's rock this room. If you look at your watch, you will note that it is 9 a.m. and we are starting on time. And I know that there are some people still coming in, and that's just fine, but when you have as much to share with a group as we do, it's really important that we stay on time, and we're going to do that. So here we go. I want you to look around this room, because this is what a sellout crowd of 700 people looks like. I want to introduce myself. I'm Tracy Andrus. I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Andrus Center for Public Policy. We are a part of the School of Public Service here at Boise State University. But to do our greeting, I want to bring up someone who really needs no introduction, but you know what? We introduce everybody else, and so I can't just say, here's Dad. So let me tell you something about a man who has served 4 terms as governor of the state of Idaho. He's a former Secretary of the Interior, and he is our patron for the Andrus Center for Public Policy. And we were established in 1992 to further his legacy issues. First, the wise use of our environmental resources. And of course, you can't forget that one of his stellar things was to stop the planned molybdenum mining of our pristine White Clouds. So, second is the proper funding of education for our children. And when Idaho was one of the last 2 states that was not providing state support for kindergartens, he twisted a few arms, as he was known to do, and made that happen. And finally, the Andrus Center is about the cultivation of leadership from all segments of society. And an example of that is what you have before you, bringing together 700 people, women and men. Men, thank you for joining us for this conversation. And over the next 2 days, we're going to talk about gender equity issues that impact us all, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're female or male. We all have a stake in this conversation, and we're about to get it started. Let's bring up Governor Andrus.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. She read that just like I wrote it. Yes, I've been very fortunate, not only in the governmental aspects, but in my family aspects as well. She's a very talented young woman, and this room is full of you this morning. We welcome you, the Andrus Center, to the Women and Leadership Conference, 2nd annual one. As Tracy pointed out, it's a sellout crowd, and I can open up and I can say, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There's 1, 2, 3. Anyway, great to have you here, and thank you for your support. Each of you, I hope, have your program. You find that it's clear full of information that's necessary. We have 2 full days of outstanding speakers and presenters to share with you their life history, their goals, and their successes. I would just echo what Tracy said about let's stay on time, because it's very, very important that we don't drop behind. So do me a favor, and when we shift from one topic or one room to another, please do that. Now, one thing that I would remind you of, that in 2003, we here at Boise State University in the state of Idaho got very, very fortunate in that we selected Dr. Bob Kustra as the incoming president of Boise State University. He's a man of vision, has proven this. If you look at the enrollment, we have, under his leadership, we've become the largest university in the state of Idaho. We are recognized as a research university, not only here but throughout the United States. And just this year, we were designated as a doctoral research university in the Carnegie classification of higher education. Now, all of this and the infrastructure that it takes to manage this has happened on his watch, and the vision that he displayed to us almost 15 years ago has paid off big time. He's here to welcome you to our institution, President Bob Kustra.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much, Governor. That was very kind of you, but I want to talk about this conference right now, and I'm also going to slip something in about this guy who I met in 2003 and who has been such an incredible inspiration to me and so many with whom I work here at Boise State. First of all, I might point out that it's not every day we fill the Jordan Ballroom. So congratulations to the Andrus Center and to this conference for pulling this off. This is great to see you so far back in the room. I know you're going to have a great couple of days here at Boise State. I'm also aware of the fact that you come from all over, that you're here from various parts of the land, and we so much appreciate it. I know we have presenters from all over the country. We have folks from all over Idaho. And you know, it's a small number of people who are in my line of work. And so when somebody travels all the way across the country from another university or college, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank them publicly for doing so. And one of your presenters today is Laurie Leshen, who is the president of Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and she's sitting right here. Laurie, thanks for coming all the way from Worcester, Mass. We're really proud to have the Andrus Center for Public Policy on our campus. Governor Andrus and I, from the day we met, talked about how this campus could accommodate and could support the work of the Andrus Center. Tracy has already run through the governor's major concerns and issues and priorities over his incredible, long, and dedicated career to the people of this country and the people of this state. Whether it's environmental resources and public lands, adequate funding for education, or the cultivation of leaders for our society today, which is really what brings us all together this morning and for these next couple of days. Cecil Andrus has been there for you and for so many across this state and across this nation. 4 terms as governor, Secretary of the Interior under President Carter. It's just a remarkable career. But what stands out in these difficult days more than anything else in Cecil's resume is something that you really don't put on a resume. You don't find it on many resumes. First of all, there aren't many people in public life today who deserve to have it on their resume. But this man has been the expert at the art of compromise over his long career. During his years, he spent so much time bringing people together, not tearing people apart. And more than anything else, we need his legacy. We need him here with us. We need to remember what he stood for. We need to remember that when we vote in November. We need to remember that throughout our careers as citizens of this great nation. Cecil Andrus, thank you for never letting us forget the importance of that important principle. Over the next couple of days, you're going to hear from an extraordinary group of presenters. They're going to share their knowledge, their motivation, their paths to success, with a focus on empowerment for women in business, in politics, and in life. There is much to be learned from those who have cracked the glass ceiling. And I might add, that I have the privilege of working with many here at Boise State who have cracked that glass ceiling, and I know they are here as a part of the program and in some cases presenting as well. Now, I'll say one final thing. It takes a great deal of work to plan and to execute a conference like this, to bring these incredible presenters from all over here to Boise State on this day. Takes a lot of vision, takes planning and execution. And Tracy just came up here so briefly to introduce Dad, but I want to spend a minute or so recognizing the work that Tracy Andrus has done with our Dean of the School of Public Service, Corey Cook, as the Andrus Center and the School of Public Service have worked so closely together. But really, Tracy Andrus is the person, the motivating person behind this conference and the person that made this happen and the person who, on a day-to-day basis, makes the Andrus Center happen. Thank you very much, Tracy, for the work you do for us here. With that, I'm just going to wish you well. I hope you have a great time here at Boise State. We're delighted to have you get out and about and see the campus and what we have to offer in every way and enjoy our students along the way. Thank you very much. Have a great conference, and go Broncos.
Okay, I have 3 minutes for notes. We used to call these housekeeping notes. We've changed that to meeting notes now. Couple of things. Yes, exactly. Couple of things. I'm not going to go through all our sponsors. They're in your program, but I want you to take a look, because the people who are helping to underwrite this conference are people who believe in women and leadership. So pay attention to who they are. Thank them when you get a chance, and use their services, because they're giving back in the way that's important to all of us. The other thing, Dr. Kustra talked about putting on this conference. I have to tell you, we are a small staff, and this would not happen without the help of literally over 100 volunteers, and I don't know how many hours. I mean, I've lost track, but I guarantee you it's over 1,000 hours to put this together of volunteers. So let's have a round of applause for our volunteers. Now, every volunteer organization needs a head, and despite what Dr. Kustra said, and I appreciate it very much, that's not me. I want you to look at this woman back here who, raise your hand, Kathy Scott. Kathy Scott is the heart and soul of everything we do, and she was in on the ground floor leading the charge for putting together this wonderful conference. She also has 2 very able right hands. I want Beverly Scott, raise your hand. Beverly has been working with us for the last 3 years, and as a result of this conference, switched her major. She is now a senior about to graduate in Women and Gender Studies. And, you know, in every volunteer organization, sometimes you just reach out and grab somebody and say, we really need you to be a volunteer. So we reached into the School of Public Service and took a hold of Terry Wilkins, who's their special events planner, to help us out. Terry, raise your hand. Okay, a couple really fast last things. Thank you, everybody. If you want to follow us on Twitter, #WomenLead2016. Take your pictures, post them. We love that. We'll have a Twitter feed going out there. It's really important. At the end of each of our presenters, we'll have 20 minutes for questions and answers. You've got question cards on your tables. Write them out when you think about them. And at the end of the speakers, we will have people circulating. Ladies, raise your hands that are helping to pick up those cards back there in the corner. They will circulate throughout. They'll pick up your question cards and they'll bring them up to the front. Evaluations, you've got little evaluation forms on your tables as well. Those are really important. I'll tell you what, today's conference was made by last year's evaluations. So these are really, really important. Please do that. We have an information desk out there where you're registered. If you've got any questions, go out there, ask the volunteers out there. They know a whole lot more about what's going on than I do. And including, we've had some questions about lactation rooms. We do have the Gender Equity Room, which is the Lactation Center for Boise State, is in that northwest corner. But because we have so many women here today, if it gets full, we even have room in the Boynton room. We're going to make room, which is in our volunteer room. So go out and check at the information desk if that's a need of yours, and we'll get you taken care of. Finally, one of the issues that we learned when you bring this many women into Jordan Ballroom and you have a quick break, the bathrooms get a little overloaded. So we have had instances of women taking over the men's bathroom, and you know, if there are no men around, that's okay, but in deference to the men who have joined us and the men who are in here, if we don't want to take it over by putting a sign and changing it, this is now a women's bathroom, but post somebody outside, send your people in, and then clear the way for any men that need it, all right? We'll all work together, we'll all get it done. Okay, I have the distinct honor right now to introduce our first speaker, Lisa Maatz. As a top policy advisor for the American Association of University Women, Lisa works to advance AAUW's priority issues on Capitol Hill, in the White House, and in coalition with other organizations, including the National Coalition for Women and Girls in Education and the Paycheck Fairness Act Coalition. Lisa's grassroots advocacy career began when she was the executive director of Turning Point, a battered women's program recognized for excellence by the Ohio Supreme Court. She went on to work for the NOW Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Older Women's League, and she was a legislative aide to U.S. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, a Democrat out of New York. Her honors include, and I just took a few of them because it is a very long list, the National Committee on Pay Equity's Win Newman Advocacy Award, the National Association of Partnerships in Equity's first ever Public Policy Advocate for Equity Award, a Congressional Fellowship in Women and Public Policy from the Women's Research and Education Institute, and an appointment to the Washington, D.C. Commission on Women. Lisa was recently featured in the book Secrets of Powerful Women, and I think she's going to share some of those today. She's a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Ohio University and currently serves on the university's Diversity Alumni Advisory Board. She has 2 master's degrees from Ohio State and holds an adjunct appointment with the Women and Politics Institute at American University. You can follow her on @LisaMaatz. I had the great thrill to listen to Lisa speak earlier this year, and I know you're going to enjoy her. So let me get off the stage, and please help me welcome Lisa Maatz to the stage.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, Idaho. Good morning. What a great crowd. I am so excited to be here for the next 2 days and this amazing sold-out conference. I want to congratulate the Andrus Center for putting this event together, and I'm so flattered and honored to be asked to be part of the event. I also want to pay appropriate homage to Governor Andrus, who I have come to enormously respect. His work, his dedication, and I think in many respects is an inspiration to many of us as we do this work. So thank you very much, Governor. Well, let's talk about women in leadership. Let's talk about gender and politics. Is that an issue that's high on everybody's mind these days? Gee, could there be something going on, I don't know, that is motivating that? I want to tell you a little story about how I got involved, my first brush, if you will, with gender and politics. And to do that, I need to take you back to my hometown. I was 8 years old, in 3rd grade, at Hinckley Elementary, just outside of Cleveland, Ohio. It was in the Rust Belt. It was in the 70s. Tough years for a lot of us. And my school reflected that. We had amazing teachers, but not great resources, not great facilities. One of the things we didn't have, believe it or not, were doors on the bathroom stalls for the girls. Now, you're going to have to put your 8-year-old girl hat on, the guys too, because I'm sure you can, to think about what that means. It was, I think, in many respects, something we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to. The school was, as I said, having some facility issues, and we just made do. We made the best of it. But somehow we found out that the boys had doors. And I remember thinking, well, from a practicality sake, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But also thinking, boy, that doesn't seem fair. I'm not sure I equated it to gender right away, but it was definitely an instance where I thought, I need to bring this to somebody's attention. Now, I have to tell you, I was that little kid who got the mail for the principal's secretary lived next door, my mother was president of the PTA, I was that kid, right? So let's just be clear about that from the get-go. So I decided I was going to go and talk to the principal. The principal's name is Mr. Ginky. Is that not the best elementary school principal name ever, Mr. Ginky? And Mr. Ginky was my pal. He was my friend. And I was sure that if I went to Mr. Ginky with any problem, no matter how big, no matter how small, he was going to take care of that for me, because that's what Mr. Ginky did. So I went to see him, and I said, you know, Mr. Ginky, it's really strange, because I found out at lunchtime the boys have doors on their restrooms, and the girls don't. I said, we can get doors, right? That isn't a big deal. You can make that happen. And he literally patted me on the head and said, you know, Lisa, I'm glad you told me, because I always want to hear from you. But we have a lot of issues that we need to address in school. And that just might not be one that we can get to. And I remember leaving that interaction and thinking, boy, did that not go the way I wanted it to, the way I expected it to, the way I thought it should have gone. And this was on a Friday, and so I decided to think about it over the weekend. In fact, it wasn't a decision, it just kept nagging me. What should I do? I didn't like how that felt. Is there anything I can do? And I thought about it, and come Monday, I came back to school, and I started a petition. Yes, I did. 8 years old, a petition. And it was a petition to get doors on the girls' restrooms. Now, as you can imagine, it was initially pretty hard to get people to sign that petition, because they knew I had every intention, obviously, of giving it to the principal. They were afraid that we were going to get in trouble. They were afraid, like many of us are, concerned about the repercussions when you speak truth to power. Right? How is this going to work out? What's going to happen? Am I up for this? But I talked to my best friends, and eventually, learning my lobbying skills early, was able to get 7 or 8 of my best friends on that petition. Once I had them, that critical core, then more people started coming forward. Because, surprise, surprise, everybody agreed that the girls should have doors on their bathrooms, right? By the end of the week, the boys agreed the girls should have doors on their bathrooms. We had all of the 2nd and 3rd graders pretty much on this petition. So this is now a week after my infamous conversation with Mr. Ginky, and it's time, the roosters have come home. It's time for me to give this petition to Mr. Ginky. I was a little nervous about that. And I can remember it as clear as day. You know, you think about those times in your life when something's happened, and you remember what you were wearing, you remember the scents in the air, you remember the weather. This is one of those days for me. And I took this petition, and oh, I wish you could have seen this petition. This was an 8-year-old girl's dream of a petition. It was pulled out of a wire notebook and raggedy on the edges, but we'd curled them up to make it look fancy. We had decorated it with stickers. I do believe Hello Kitty was involved. But this was a great petition. And I took that petition and I put it on Mr. Ginky's desk. And I said just a few words. I said, Mr. Ginky, I'm not the only one who wants doors. And he looked at me with that expression that many of us have seen, probably many of us, those of you who are parents, have used, which is both pride and frustration. And he said, Lisa, again, this was quite an undertaking. I will let you know next week. And I felt good about the interaction. Now, 2 weeks later, we had doors. But here's Paul Harvey's rest of the story. And here's why it's important for what we're talking about over these next 2 days, for women in leadership. Because it's as much about leading, it's also about knowing when to follow, knowing when to support, knowing when to have somebody's back. I told this same story when I was at the 2004 Republican National Convention. Lifetime Television was there, and at both conventions had these great events for young women to learn about politics. Brilliant idea. And they liked the story so much, they wanted to put me in this book, Secrets of Powerful Women. Well, as you can imagine, my mother was thrilled. Best PR agent ever. What did my mom do? My mom found Mr. Ginky. Mr. Ginky is alive and well and 278 years old, living in Medina County, Ohio. And she invited Mr. Ginky and Mrs. Cosman, the all-powerful school secretary, our neighbor, to lunch to share the book with them. And here's what I came to find out. After I dropped that lovely work of art on Principal Ginky's desk, he called my mother. I didn't know this until this book came out. And that to me is fascinating because for her, it was just what you do. And that's one of the things I want to impress from you from my talk today about how women support each other. It is just what we do. So he calls my mom and he's like, Diane, what have you put her up to this time? Because let's be clear, she was the president of the PTA. She was the president of the Hinckley Women's Club. My dad was the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He was elected and chair of the township trustees. Where do you think I learned about petitions? Right? What have you put her up to this time? And she said, Roy, I don't know what you're talking about, because I had not told her. I was not sure she'd approve. I was going to make trouble at school. And he said to her, what am I going to do? What am I supposed to do with this petition? And what did my mother say? She could have said any number of things. She could have said, I'll talk to her, we'll figure this out. Don't worry about it, Roy. Maybe the PTA will come forward and we'll maybe raise some money for doors. I mean, there are all kinds of things she could have said. Here's what she did say. She said, well, Roy, I guess you're going to get some doors. My mom, woman number one who had my back, didn't have to, could have undermined me, could have put it aside, could have said it wasn't an important issue. Woman number one who had my back. Now, it was my mom, but it still counts. Mrs. Cosman, Mr. Ginky come to lunch. We find out after he put down the phone talking to my mom, he went out to see Mrs. Cosman, the all-powerful school secretary, and said, what am I supposed to do with this? Have you seen this petition? And of course, I had showed it to her before I went in. She signed it. He had not, Principal Ginky had not yet noticed that. But again, here's woman number two. All kinds of different options for her in terms of what she said, what she could have done. What did she say? She said, Roy, I've been telling you to put doors on those bathrooms for 6 months. I guess you're going to get some doors. Now, of course, I would love to think that my little agitation with that petition and my friends were able to make that happen. And it might have happened just as I told you. But the notion that we had two powerful women, women in leadership, who had my back, who understood the issue, and were themselves willing to speak truth to power with, by the way, very little fanfare. They weren't worried about credit so much as they were worried about getting the job done. And we got those doors. Think about how that can play out in a business situation, in a school situation, in terms of how we treat each other, how we work together. Because we know today, unfortunately, we still have outright bias and discrimination, but it's somewhat more rare. I think, truthfully, if you were to ask and poll the women in this audience, what we really see, and that can be even more detrimental, is the implicit bias, the unconscious discrimination, right? I read an article recently, and it was fascinating to me because it was about women in the Obama administration and how they dealt with leadership issues, how they supported each other. How many people here have ever been in a meeting where you had a great idea and you were waiting for the right moment to say it, and then somebody else says it first? How many people have been there? Yeah, and you're thinking to yourself, ugh, that was my idea. Let me ask you another question. How many women here have been in a meeting, you have a great idea, you talk about it, you get a fairly muted reaction. 10 minutes later, the guy 3 seats down from you says the same thing, and it is hailed as E equals MC squared. That's right. So this was something that women in the Obama administration faced. This was something that they actually banded together to decide they were going to take on. And Mr. Obama appointed a pretty diverse cabinet and administration, but not that much better than previous presidents. So women were still absolutely the minority, women of color in particular, minority. And here's what they decided to do. Not only were they going to speak up and quit kind of saving or holding those ideas back for the right time, but whenever a woman did that, the other woman in the room, because sometimes it was only one, sometimes it was more, would automatically second that emotion, so to speak. Part of the reason for that is to give it some credibility to continue the discussion. But the other reason for it was to make sure everybody in the room knew whose idea that was. Isn't that brilliant? A handy and simple tool to help support women in places where we know unconscious bias can rule. How many women in here, I'm just going to run through a couple of examples. I don't need to see hands necessarily, but I'm sure I'll see some shaking or nodding heads, have been asked to take notes, have been asked to take care of the office birthday parties, to get the coffee. That's an age-old one we know. Have been told, well, we didn't ask because we didn't think you could get a sitter. We didn't ask because we weren't sure you wanted that much responsibility. Maybe you didn't want, we didn't think you could be that travel and be that far away from your family. Now, any one of these things we might be willing to do. There's nothing wrong with taking notes or getting the coffee when it's done in a way that is appropriate. But when it's clearly a implicit gender bias, it has consequences in terms of how our ideas are treated down the road, in terms of how our ideas are accepted and lauded down the road. One of the things that AUW has done recently is a study, and you have some information in your book, called Barriers and Bias, Implicit Bias Against Gender and Women in Leadership. Now here's something that I want to tell you about. We actually developed a test. You can't do it on your phone, so don't get out your phone now. You can only do it on a computer, a laptop. But you can literally take a test to see what kind of bias you may or may not have about women in leadership. Here's what's fascinating about that test. Women and men are biased against women in leadership. Even women who claim the title of feminist are biased against women in leadership. Why is that? Some of it has to do with optics, right? I think it was Gloria Steinem who said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So having those kinds of examples, people who are doing great work, doing a good job, and can be shown as a role model is huge. But the other thing that we found about implicit bias is that it's very much tied to gender roles and what people feel is appropriate for men's behavior and women's behavior. And let's be clear in here, we're putting a straitjacket on men too. This goes both ways. Every time we make an assumption about who's going to be doing the child care, and if that's going to be a woman, we've made an assumption about who's not involved with their children. I don't want to get too much into politics, but we had a big conversation this week between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump about child care. Is that not amazing and wonderful to have the major party nominations of the two big parties talking about child care? Something virtually every woman has to deal with, virtually every man has to deal with. But here's what was fascinating about Mr. Trump's plan. Mr. Trump's plan was only for birth mothers, not fathers, not adoptive mothers, not adoptive fathers. Certainly doesn't take into account other kinds of families. The thing that's interesting about that is that it'd be very tempting to say, that's a good start. If we could get 6 weeks paid leave for moms, that's a really good start. And in some instance, it could be. But when we continue to make the assumption that only moms will be responsible, that also opens the door to this implicit bias, and in some cases to outright discrimination. Ask a woman who's pregnant how easy it is to find a job. Not so much. And yes, we have laws to prevent that, but the reality is a lot of the discrimination that we see is at this unconscious level, this bias. Because we've all been raised in the same stew, right? With the same seasonings and flavorings of the various isms that are out there that impact how we judge and evaluate others. And so even for those of us who work on these issues and carry these issues, we've got that as well, internalized. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Once we understand it, once we know it, what are we going to do about it? The other thing, of course, that I think is important to remember here is that there is no lack, of course, of qualified women. As AUW will tell you, women are the majority on college campuses now. Thank you, Title IX. Right? We're not the majority in the professional schools yet. We're certainly not the majority in STEM fields, but we are the majority of women, students in college. But as I said, so much of this bias comes from our traditional roles in the home. Let me look at it, or have you think about it this way. In the 1960s, the top 3 jobs for women: teacher, what do you think the other one was? Nurse, what's the third? Secretary, that's right. 2016, actually 2015. What are the top 3 jobs for women? Teacher, nurse, secretary. Not a thing wrong with that. We need teachers, nurses, and secretaries. But because they're extensions of what women did in the home, think about what a mom does. She teaches, she nurses, she's a secretary, she's a bookkeeper, she does a variety of things that we took those skills then into the workplace. That work is devalued, largely because of the gender of the person who typically does it. How do we know this? Because of comparable work studies. In Long Island, they did a study of people who worked for the city government and found that they were paying their first-year groundskeepers more than they were paying their first-year teachers. What was the major difference between those two positions? Groundskeeper was a man, teacher was a woman. Teacher even needed to have a degree. And again, groundskeeping, we need it, perfectly respectable. But we're valuing work not just based on what that work is, but who is doing it. That, my friends, is a big part of why we have the gender gap. Idaho, at this point, is at 73 cents on the dollar. 73 cents for women, dollar for white men. When we talk about women of color, that gets even worse. When we talk about moms, that gets even worse. Studies, in fact, have shown that when women have children, their wages go down. When men have children, their wages go up. Now, again, we're making an assumption there about what roles people are going to play. And those may, in fact, be the choices those individuals may have made for themselves. But certainly, based on how we're compensating, we're not really leaving it open for free choice. By the way, Idaho ranks 45th out of the 50 states in terms of your wage gap. Now, we've got brand new numbers coming out this week. We'll have brand new state-based numbers on Thursday that I'll be able to share with you. AUW will have them on their website. The other numbers came out yesterday. Remember we were at 79 cents on the dollar nationally? Look out, ladies, it's now 80 cents. Don't spend it all in one place, right? Now, as I said, we have plenty of women that can take leadership positions. But there's more than just it's the right thing to do case to make for here. It's not just about it being the right thing. It is. It's right, it's fair, it's good, it's just. But it's also the smart thing to do. Let me make the business case for you in terms of gender equality, equity, and diversity. One of the things that we know is that when you have more diverse people at the table, you have better innovation. One of the things the United States really needs to ramp up is our 21st century global competitiveness. If we want to keep innovating at the level that we've seen this country do, we have to have all our brains at work, and we have to have a variety of ideas and perspectives at the table. When we don't, literally very bad things can happen. Not only are we not competitive, but the products can be inferior, even deadly. Anybody remember years ago when airbags first came out? All of these really petite women that were killed by airbags because they designed the airbags for a typical man. 5'8", 160 pounds. The force of the airbag was so strong, it was killing petite women. They didn't have women on the design team who thought about the fact that maybe not everybody is 5'7", right? So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's not just the feel-good thing to do, it's the smart thing to do to come up with the best product. We know from a political standpoint that when women vote, we change the conversation because we have very specific concerns. We know when we elect women, regardless of party, it changes the conversation. Research studies show that the most effective legislators at the state level are women in the minority party, whatever party that might be. Why is that? The collaboration, the willingness to work across the aisle, to have that conversation. Right now, unfortunately, we have situations in this country where we are so polarized, where we have redistricted and gerrymandered ourselves into the bluest of the blue and the reddest of the red, and then we elect those extremes, send them to Congress, and ask them to talk to each other. How's that working out for us? But we do know that women collaborate more. It's simply in the research. It shows in the bills they introduce and in the successes they have. Many of you probably remember the government shutdown. What now, 4 years ago, 3 years ago? Brokered by women in the Senate in the minority party who said, this is crazy, and took it into their own hands, came up with the deal, and made it happen. This is huge. This is important. And it doesn't mean that we don't appreciate men in politics. Of course we do. But the reality is when you have more diverse minds at the table, you are always going to have a better product. The other thing that I think is particularly important is that there have been a lot of studies about diversity at the CEO level, at the vice president level, at the board level. Right now in the United States, only 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. It's even fewer for women of color. But here's what's fascinating. The companies that had the most diverse CEO, board, and kind of C-suite vice presidential level candidates made the most money. They were the most profitable. They had less turnover. They were better recruiters. Their products sold better, whatever their product might be. So the case, my friends, is not just that it's a good idea, that it's a smart idea, that it's important to give everybody a fair chance. That is important. But it's also because it is good for business. Companies that offer paid leave, companies that have childcare subsidies, companies that recognize work-life balance issues for both women and men are more profitable. Less turnover, higher retention, happier employees, happy campers make happy products, right? That is what we're talking about here. The last thing that I wanted to do is just share with you a few observations in terms of kind of these life lessons. We talked about women having each other's back. We've talked about when you're at the table, sharing those ideas. And there are a couple of key things that I always try to share with folks. And I've learned them throughout the years. I've been in Washington, D.C. more than 20 years and talk about a soupy, swampy place for a woman to be. And as a lobbyist, and yes, I am a lobbyist, but I use my powers for good, I swear. As a lobbyist, as you can imagine, I find myself in all kinds of interesting situations, some of them fairly sticky. And what has been able to kind of get me through? What have been my guiding principles? I think this works regardless of whether you're a lobbyist or not. And by the way, I hate to tell you all this, but you all are lobbyists. You all use your powers of persuasion, whether it's to get your kid to agree to go to bed, whether it's to get your husband to go to the movie you want to see. You all lobby. Yeah. But anyway, what are these two big words or two big pieces of advice that I would give you? The first one is never burn a bridge. Literally in DC, today's intern is tomorrow's member of Congress. But in the corporate world, in the nonprofit world, not burning a bridge. It's about relationships. And that's where women excel. Don't burn that bridge. Figure out a way to keep communication going. You never know when you are going to run into somebody again. That is a huge one to think about. The other one that has been a really primary guiding force for me is know your line in the sand. It's one of the reasons why I admire Governor Andrus so much, because he knew his line in the sand and he didn't cross it. Even when it cost him personally, he didn't cross it. What is your line in the sand? What is your baseline bedrock principle? What you will and will not do. For me, in lobbying terms, what I will and will not do to pass a law. What I will and will not do to pass or to get into a meeting. What is your bedrock principle? I will do X, Y, Z and no more. I will go this far and do at least this much, but no more. When you have that bedrock principle, when you know your line in the sand from which you do not variate, you will always be able to look yourself in the mirror. You will always be able to be proud of what you do. You will always be able to look at what you're doing and share that with pride, with joy, with your family, with your community. Because work is a big part of our lives. We want that to be something that we enjoy, not just something that we're good at, but something that we enjoy. Don't burn a bridge, know your line in the sand. And you know what? Coming to this conference, I'm going to add that as the third, is a great idea. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lisa. Now, if you got your question cards, please send them to just pick your hand up, send them to the women who are circulating, and we're going to start right here. See, there's a reason to get here early and get up close. Okay. Lisa, what advice do you have on how to respond to mansplaining? To mansplaining. I'm sorry, I haven't seen that. I like that word.
Yeah.
To mansplaining in professional settings.
Right. So first of all, does everybody understand what mansplaining is? Mansplaining is a variation, obviously, on the word explaining, right? And it's when a man tells a woman essentially her business. So I'll give you a really good example of this. There was a woman astronaut up in the space station. This just blew up on Twitter this past week. There was a woman astronaut up on the space station who was showing how water can spontaneously boil in certain environments. And she was excited about it because, let's just face it, she's on the space station boiling water, and that is so cool, right? And this guy tweeted back and said, really, it's not that exciting. It's just because of X, Y, Z, blah, 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 and essentially the equation for why the water would boil. And then Twitter blew up with all these people saying, yes, that's right. Explain physics to a rocket scientist. Right? So when we talk about mansplaining, it's when a man feels the need to explain our business to us, when we in fact know it perhaps even better than he does. And how do you respond? You know, it is a tough situation because we also, as I said earlier, want to maintain relationships. In a business setting, it's tough if you embarrass someone, but it's not wrong to stand up, to say, that's an interesting point. That was part of the development of my idea. Or, I'm so glad you understand the program as well as I do. Right? So if you can put a compliment into, but at the same time craft it in a way that shows you are still in charge, you're still the one with that message and idea, that can be a really useful way to do it. It's tough because I just wrote a whole article for AEW's Outlook magazine about responding to, kind of unconscious implicit bias. Think about in a family situation. And your daughter is really excited about the chemistry set she got for Christmas, and your mother-in-law says, won't it be great for her to be a nurse? And what would you say? You don't want to insult your mother-in-law. You certainly don't want anyone to think you don't think nurses are great, because my mom's a nurse, and they are. But what can you say to make sure your daughter doesn't think she's constrained, that nurse is the only option for her? To say something like, nursing would be an amazing occupation, and with her ability for science, she might want to be a doctor, she might want to be a physicist. So you take it and you run it in the direction that you want to go. Yeah. Other questions?
I've got some right here, but I have a Maya Copa here. The gender bias thing works both ways. Mm-hmm. So when I had our volunteers stand up and I said, ladies, raise your hands. We have a fair number of male volunteers as well that help us out through this. And one of them just brought me up a question, and I looked at him and I thought, oh, I did it. So thank you to our volunteers of both genders.
Right.
Okay, Lisa, in this political period of polarizing and even incendiary behavior / speaking, how do we separate ourselves from the group to represent our views without supporting further divisiveness?
Yeah. Boy, this has been an election for the ages, hasn't it? And I hate to tell you, it ain't over yet. We still got more than almost 60 days and 3 debates to go. And the polarizing environment, not just from the presidential election, but onward down the ticket, can really be uncomfortable. People get very personally involved, and in some respects that's not a bad thing. You want people, obviously, to be invested in their democracy, to be passionate about voting, especially. But there does seem to be a situation going on right now where facts are less relevant than they should be. And that in and of itself can be an issue, right? How do you deal with the polarization? You know, for AUW, it's always been really important that we are not only nonpartisan, but that we work with both parties as much as we can. I mean, the reality is when we talk about women's issues, which by the way are really family issues, are economic issues, are education issues, right? It does us no good if one party ignores us and the other one takes us for granted, right? So we need to be able to speak truth to power. Quite frankly, I want them both to fear us a lot. But the reality is women obviously are a huge voting bloc, and it's why there is so much information tailored to us in an election season. But anyway, what to do when it feels like it's getting away? The conversation is getting away from you, maybe getting a little too heated, too polarized. Humor is always good. Humor is always good. Saying you will have to agree to disagree is less funny, but can also work. The key here is that you want to show the other people in that conversation the respect that you want them to reflect to you, right? Model that. Even if they don't treat you as well as you'd like. Again, you want to be able to know your line in the sand, to be able to look yourself in the face. I will treat people the way I want to be treated. It's a golden rule for a reason, right? So that's the advice that I'd give. I mean, there is also the reason why people don't talk about politics and religion in polite settings. At the same time, with the crazy election that we are experiencing, all of us right now, it's hard not to talk about it, isn't it? It's hard not to have it come up in a variety of settings where it wouldn't have. So stay true to your own moral compass. Try not to necessarily impose your beliefs on somebody else. Conversation and debate is great. Ugly disagreement, not so much. Okay.
What is your ideal child care plan for all? And this says moms and dads.
Well, I think ideal child care, and it's going to be a combination of child care for the kid itself, but also paid leave for the parents. I think right now we have guaranteed family medical leave, unpaid, in this country for 12 weeks. We've shown through surveys and usage of the law that the vast majority of folks can't use it because it's unpaid. We've also shown that men are much less likely to use it than women, when in fact part of the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, part of its actual reason for being was to help to break down some of those stereotypes. It's literally in the bill, that if we have family medical leave available to men and women both take it, it will be more acceptable for men to have that role. And women will be less penalized for the assumption of them having that role. It hasn't worked out that way because it's not unpaid. So that's the first thing you have to do, is you have to figure out a paid system. There is a bill out there called the Family Act that AUW strongly supports, and it models itself off of the Social Security system, where the employer pays a little bit and the employee pays a little bit, to create a fund to allow for 12 weeks paid parental leave. That is something that I think is important for new moms. I think it's important for new dads. It's important for anybody who's adopted a child. So that first thing is key. 12 weeks, many people would say, is not enough. I think we always have to struggle with how we're going to pay for it. That's the conversation. So could it be 16 weeks? Yes. It would be more expensive. We need to think about that. But we need to make it available to everybody. Then beyond that, in terms of child care, one of the things that, in terms of child care itself, one of the things we've seen is the huge impact that Head Start has had, not just for underprivileged kids, but any kid who goes to pre-K. So part of what we need to be looking at is expanding our educational system, which, as we all know by the happy smiles we see on parents' faces around Labor Day, is not only a great way to educate your child, but it's a great form of childcare, right? But if we start them earlier, we get them at 3, so we have pre-K a couple of years. That would help enormously, not just in terms of childcare for parents, but in terms of making sure our kids are ready to learn, making sure our kids are ready to get into tougher fields like STEM. So that's key. Then the other thing that has to happen with any childcare program is that we have to recognize that not everybody works 9 to 5. right? Yeah, we have to recognize not everybody works 9 to 5. Not everybody works Monday through Friday. So your child care system has to have, without a huge penalty in terms of an increase in price, the availability of high-quality, affordable child care at virtually, quite frankly, 24 hours a day. That's the other piece of it. It is a tough situation, but every family has to deal with it, which means it's the meat of public policy for families. It is the struggle of every family to pay for child care, to find a good place. Child care in a lot of states is more expensive than going to college. And some of it, quite frankly, isn't all that good, right? So it's not just the availability, it's not just the cost, it's also the quality, because we want to make sure we're doing the best for our kids.
What's your advice for youth going out into the world?
Oh. You know, it's so interesting. Probably a lot of you have seen different articles out there about the millennial generation and how that is changing the workplace, right? This notion that everybody needs a trophy, no matter what they do, so to speak. But the reality is, I always say for younger people, I'm a big proponent of internships. I'm a big proponent of shadowing. I'm a big proponent of picking out adults in your life that you admire and that you'd like to be like someday. Who do you want to be when you grow up? And then see if you can't spend some time with that person. See if you can't see being an intern with them for a longer period of time, shadowing them for a day. Find out what it's really like to do that job. Now that obviously begs the question that we have to have adults and older folks willing to do that, but I think most of us are. Most of us are flattered when a younger person expresses that kind of interest and that kind of appreciation. So I would definitely say, don't be afraid to learn from your elders, so to speak, but also that your voice, the youth voice, has a huge role, an important role at the table. In this election, which actually started in 2012, there will be more millennials voting than baby boomers. That's huge. That changes the face of the electorate, does it not? That is a more diverse electorate. That is an electorate with more women voting. That is an electorate that has more an economic diversity as well. So, your voice is critically important, but remember, it is part of a collection of voices. And we all need to respect each other as we have those conversations.
Had your bathroom door project stalled, what would have been your next move as an 8-year-old and then looking back today as a over 21-year-old?
If, you know what, if Mr. Ginky hadn't, because I think I still would have gotten the signatures. So I'm going to assume I've still gotten the signatures, but I'm going to assume that this means Mr. Ginky still said no. At that point, I probably would have done the age-old go to mom, right? Look what I did. He didn't say, and let's be clear, I knew my mom was president of the PTA. So I wouldn't just be going to mom, I think I would have gone to her as the president of the Parent Teacher Association. So that's number one. And from my perspective back now as I look at it, you know, I loved the fact that Mrs. Cosman signed the petition. And I think now I probably would have tried to get more teachers to sign the petition, more teaching aides, cafeteria workers, make it not just about the kids, although that was important because it was our restroom, but to lend that support. Anytime you want to move a policy proposal through to be successful, it can't just come from one group. You've got to have a variety of people with competing interests and, you know, that enlightened self-knowledge, what's in it for them. I think I would have done that, is bring in more people. Yeah.
Are there studies, when you look at the studies out there on explicit and implicit bias, are there studies out there that specifically look at older people, especially women, that would help us in the workplace today?
You know, there are studies out there, and there is that stereotype, for some people it's a reality, of older women who aren't especially helpful to other women. We've all at least heard about that, right? It's fascinating, though, because when they look at the bias there, and the way it manifests itself in the workplace. One of the things that we really have to look at is that women of a certain age had to be certain types of individuals to get where they are. The other thing is that oftentimes, and sometimes they were told this explicitly, but otherwise it was implied, there's only one spot, or there's only two spots. This is the girl's job, right? So that it really did pit women against each other in kind of an unhealthy way. The implicit bias studies really show that it is intergenerational. It does tend to be less strong in younger people. As we've seen with the millennial generation and the generation coming up before them, they're much more fluid with their ideas about relationships and work and family. But the research does show that it pretty much affects everybody across the line. But I will say, for the older generation, for baby boomers, part of the issue is what they had to fight in order to get just where they are. We deal with that sometimes, in the progressive community. We have an awful lot of organizations where the founder is still running them. The founder is now 75, 80 years old, not really thinking about their next act. They're happy working. But that transition to the next generation, that handoff, is something, quite frankly, that we need to pay a little bit more attention to. Because it doesn't just happen seamlessly if you don't pay attention to it. And I think that is something that we're going to be struggling with. We're seeing that now, truthfully, with elected officials and who's running for office and who's not, right? We don't have nearly enough women running for office. One of the things AUW does that I'm very proud of is we have a program called Elect Her, which we do on college campuses. And we teach young women how to run for office on that college campus, whether they want to be president of the student body, president of their sorority, whatever it might be. We've been doing it long enough now, we have statistics, because we are AUW and we love our statistics. 90% of the women who go through our training win their elections. But we go one step further, because what we also want them to do is not just be active on their college campus, but we want to make sure that they see politics and public policy as a legitimate career field. To think about running for office sooner rather than later. Because so much of our political machinery is based on seniority. So if you don't start young, you won't necessarily have an opportunity to rise to the level where you can make real change. I'll tell you, it's one of the reasons why I think Hillary Clinton was so excited to be Secretary of State. Not just because that was a plum job, of course it was, but she'd figured out the seniority system in the Senate, and she realized she would have to be 128 before she chaired a committee. So, because she got in relatively late, right? So, anyway.
Okay, last question here, and I'll put a plug out to you. I'm not great at reading some handwriting. So remember that when you write out yours, if you can make it as legible as possible. I'm going to take this last one, and I'm going to kind of hopefully get close to what it's saying. And it's talking about moms and dads and finding that 50% sharing of duties, and how do we from both sides figure out what works for the family and what is fair for the family.
Yeah, that's a great question, because when you think about it, a lot of the policy discussions that we're having right now about access to child care, paid leave, or equal pay are microcosms for conversations going on between couples about how to find the balance, the value that each person brings to that partnership, to that family. And it can be tough. One of the things that I always try to say to people is try not to make assumptions. Assumptions about what each person likes to do or doesn't like to do, about assumptions what each person should do or what they should be good at. It is a balancing act, and every conversation is going to be as different as the couple that's involved. But the reality is, we actually do need to have those conversations now. Couples that don't have that conversation end up with a really lopsided situation in terms of childcare, in terms of child rearing. And oftentimes, what we hear from men is, but I wasn't asked to help. How often is it easier for us to just do it ourselves? because we either do it faster or exactly the way we want it done. Can you let go of not exactly the way you want it done, but still getting it done? Right? So, but the conversation does need to be had, because women's and men's lives are very different than our parents. No matter what generation you are, your life is very different than your parents. And today, with technology, with the way that puts us, for some of us, on 24-hour call for work, with the way that impacts our children and the new concerns about children's use of technology and safety, all of those things have to be discussed. And those conversations, as much as they can, have to try and stray away from bias and stray away from assumptions to really what the heart of the matter is, where each of your skill levels lie, and how you want to raise your family.
Thank you, Lisa Maatz.
Thank you.
Okay, that was a terrific start to our morning, and we're just getting started. Before I let you go, there are a lot of empty 1s and 2 seats up throughout the room, and we have some people standing at the back. So if you have your purse or your notebook or something sitting on a seat, please remove that. We're gonna leave this room now, but so that when people come back in, you'll be able to find seats, and we'll hopefully get everybody sat down. We're gonna break for our skill builders. You've got a 15-minute break to get to those. There is this sheet on page 3 in your program, and that lists the skill builders and the rooms that they are in. But there are volunteers out in the hallway that will help you find the one that you want to go to. So take your bathroom break, head for your skill builders. When you get done, we are having a buffet lunch so that you don't have to wait outside the room. You can go, you can get your lunch and find a seat, and we'll see you back here at 12:15. Oh, one last thing. I'm sorry, one last thing. Again, I'm remiss. We have been joined by in July, we named a new executive director of the Andrus Center, and Dr. John Freeman, you're over there. Please wave your hand. Dr. Freeman joins us. He is a well-respected policy advocate on environment and public lands, and we are thrilled to have him join us. Go have a good time. We'll see you back here at noon.